Good afternoon, PMAP. My name is Isa Neri, one of the members of the PMAP professional staff, and I'm here today to help moderate our webinar on the topic, the Philippines Qualification Framework, or PQF, what it means for human resource development. Public Act 10968, or the Philippines Qualifications Act, establishes a system that will create a national registry of qualifications and will harmonize the current system for seamless movement of learners and workers within the country's education system and the labor market. This will ensure the alignment of qualifications to industry standards to facilitate human capital development and will be a crucial platform for coordination among the government, industry, and education sectors. As human resource managers look into the qualifications of each and every applicant in their respective companies, let us learn more about the PQF, particularly on what it is and what will be its implications to the practice of HR here in the country. Our speaker for today is a founding trustee of the Philippine think tank, Action for Economic Reforms, and coordinator of its Industrial Policy Unit. She works on the political economy of industrial policy, the link between education and economic development, and regional social policy, and she has published extensively on these topics. She also works with various LGUs and state universities and colleges towards localized industrial development planning and industry-linked education programs. She is part of the working group on education for economic development, which is advocating for greater government industry education sector coordination and the recognition of lifelong learning. Let's welcome to the webinar our speaker, Ms. Janina Joy Chavez.
Thank you, Isa, and good afternoon, PMAP. Thank you for inviting me to conduct this webinar. The PQF is a relatively new law, and the IRR, the implementing rules and regulations, are actually not promulgated yet, but hopefully they will be soon enough. But we would like to share with you the basic components and elements of the PQF so that we can have discussions on how this is relevant for human resource development. It is relatively quite difficult to digest at the first instance, but once you get to know the basics, it will be easier from there. First off, I would like to acknowledge the Working Group on Education for Economic Development, or the ED for EDWG, who has helped AER, or who has worked with AER on developing our position on the PQF, particularly our recommendations on the implementing rules and regulations. We also would like to acknowledge the different references that we consulted, like the DepEd and the PQF NCC, which have tons of materials on the PQF and related subjects. Also, Dr. Cynthia Bautista, who is the foremost expert on PQF in the country. So most of the presentation would have referred to or taken from these different materials. So first off, I would like to start on qualifications. This is all about qualifications. As human resource practitioners, you're very familiar with this, but we adapt the official definition suggested by the International Labour Organization. Qualifications as certifications awarded to an individual in recognition of having achieved particular knowledge, skills, or competencies. It is also the formal expression of the vocational or professional abilities of a worker which is recognized at international, national, or sectoral levels. So note that in qualification, what are the operative words are knowledge, skills, or competencies. Nowhere in this definition is there any mention of education attainment or the level of learning, right, that you're supposed to get before having that qualification. So it's just that. But qualification is something that we all look for in an individual to determine uh, his or her ability to do certain tasks, right? Or to dispense with some practical or professional tasks. Uh, if you have qualifications, there we also uh, do talk about qualifications framework, or how are these different qualifications being recognized or put in a structure, or even awarded. So a qualifications framework is just a mechanism. It's a structure or an instrument for the development, classification, and recognition of those skills, knowledge, and competencies along a continuum of agreed levels. It is structuring existing and new qualifications which are defined by learning outcomes, and the definition of learning outcomes are there. So a qualifications framework would have different components or different elements. First, you will have a definition or identification of the skills, knowledge, of competencies that you assign qualifications for. You have levels or agreed levels. Like if you have these skills and competencies, you can tell at what level a certain person is. Like, is he level 1, 2, 3, or up to 8? At the moment, the current framework that we're working on has 8 levels. So 1 as the lowest level and 8 as the highest level. And of course, the learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are, if you say that these qualifications are, you get to have these qualifications by being certified that you've got these learning outcomes. These are clear statements. For instance, if you're level 1, the individual can already do this type of work, right? And or will have this type of skill that is applicable in a certain specific area. So those are very specific statements that would define what an individual can do and at what scale. So that's a qualifications framework. In the country, the qualifications framework in the Philippines starts with the education system. As you know, we have a trifocalized education system. We have the Department of Education, or DepEd, that takes care of the basic education. So from K to 12, they have kindergarten, elementary, junior high school, and senior high school. Then you have the Commission on Higher Education, or CHED, that takes care of tertiary education. So from college and then graduate school. We also have the TESDA, or the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, that takes care of tech training and certification. So let's please note though that with the onset of the K to 12, training and education has also been introduced at the senior high school level, so that grades 11 and 12. So there's a sort of overlap or complementation in the textbook education in DepEd and TESDA. But whereas DepEd's textbook education is confined to the senior high school and to a specialized program like a special innovation in the alternative learning system. In TESDA, it's a much broader textbook education and regulation. Then this slide shows you it's a simple illustration of how the Philippine qualifications system is at the moment. This has been developed by DepEd and the PQF NCC, or the previous NCC. So you have 8 levels. So the yellow ladder is represents the different levels of qualifications, and then you have the system that awards these qualifications. So you have the education system, which is what I showed earlier. You have DepEd, CHED, and TESDA. And then you have the professional regulatory body, which is the PRC, or the Professional Regulatory Commission. And you have other agencies with certification functions or authority, for instance, Marina for seafarers and CAAP for aeronautics. And you have other qualification recognition mechanisms. These are mechanisms, many of these are still under development. For instance, the Philippine Credit Transfer System. So much of this, while it's in the others, in the other box, much of this will interact with the education system, the PRC, and the other mechanisms. And underneath that, we have the PQF NCC, or the Philippine Qualifications Framework, National Coordinating Council. I will go more into that later. This is a council, a group, the interagency council that was created by the PQF law. Yeah, but the other thing, basic thing that we have to take note of are PQF descriptors. Right? Descriptors are, statements of description, right? And those are descriptors for the different PQF domains. So domains are areas. Right? So there are three domains. One is the knowledge, skills, and values domain. So this is where, is that the qualification of skills or competency, whether that's manual or practical, technical, or theoretical. So those are the types of skills. In terms of, and then you have the domain of application. So are those skills applicable to a broad range of areas, or is it for a specific area only, right? So the application can be very specific or very broad, can be like singular, or it can be supervisory, or something that will require leadership, and so on. So that's what application means. And then you have the domain of independence, the degree of independence. Like you will describe the qualification based on the independence that's needed. So are those skills or are those qualifications applicable to something that requires a lot of supervision, or something that would have minimal supervision, something that's self-executory, or something that an individual should be able to do alone, and then it goes higher, like independent research, self-generated things. So the higher the degree of independence, usually the higher the level assigned to that. Similarly, the knowledge, the more intensive the knowledge and skills and values required, the higher the level assigned to that, and also for the application. The higher and the broader the application of such qualification, the higher the level assigned to that. Now, we'll go to the PQF law, or at the salient features. Republic Act number 10968, or the Philippine Qualifications Act, the long name there is an act institutionalizing the Philippine Qualifications Framework, or the PQF, establishing the PQF National Coordinating Council, and appropriating funds thereof. We have, please note that we have had the PQF, or we've been talking about this since the late 2000s, and a PQF NCC has been established by an executive order since 2012. Okay? But a law actually further institutionalizes this, and in fact broadens the mandate for the NCC. The law has been passed in earlier this year. It was signed into law in January by the President. Now, the PQF National Coordinating Council is an interagency council composed of 5 members, DepEd, with the DepEd Secretary as the chair, and the secretaries or the heads of the following agencies as members. You have the CHED, TESDA, PRC, and the Department of Labor and Employment. Aside from these 5 government agencies, you also have 1 representative from the industry sector and 1 representative from the economic sector. These are the 5 agencies are permanent members, whereas the 2 non-government representatives are non-permanent. So, and the IRR, it's the IRR that sets out the guidelines on how that will be, those will be determined. Okay, so very broadly, what is the Philippine Qualifications Framework? Um, this is the language of the law. Medyo it's not easy. It's not an easy read, but we can break this down to different elements. It's a quality assured national system for the development, recognition, and award of qualifications, which was what we've been discussing, based on standards of knowledge, skills, and values acquired in different ways and methods by learners and workers of the country. It describes the levels of education qualifications and sets the standards for qualification outcomes. Right? Um, so here it talks about qualification. It also talks about standards and talks about quality assurance. So we can the qualifications we talked about earlier. Anybody can say this is the qualification and this is what it means when you have this qualification. But there's also a very important point. When you have a qualifications framework like the PQF, then it has to be harmonized according to international standards. So that the qualifications that the country or the Philippines has would be recognized in other countries as well because it follows standards. And it also talk about quality assurance, right? So not just anybody can say, okay, you're qualified in this. So even the body or the unit that can say that you're qualified in this will have to be quality assured, right? Who can actually certify qualification and who can actually certify or quality assure and certify the qualifications that are being given out. So what's the significance of the PQF Act? There are many significance, but these are some of the major things that we come up with. We observe. One is it standardizes and makes transparent the award of qualifications. So now we always hear of diploma meals, right? So I mean, I don't. The PQF Act will not necessarily do away with the diploma meals immediately, but uh, by standardizing qualifications, by standardizing what certain levels should represent, then diploma meals will be less of a problematic phenomenon because now a diploma, when you get a diploma or a degree, it should mean something, right? So you will have shared the different schools actually reviewing curricular offerings um, to be in line with um, the standards that are required by the levels of qualifications that will be assigned to them. And then, of course, it makes it transparent. Like, but when somebody says, "I have a degree, right? A degree in this," or I have a level 5 qualification in this," then the person can go to the website and say, "What does a level 5 qualification mean?" Right? And then they will say, "Okay, that's it." Right? And if it's quality assured, then everybody can be comfortable that okay, it's a certification, it's a qualification that was given to them based on standard and based on quality assured system. So it's not just a certification given by anybody. Second, it provides mechanisms for equivalencies and facilitates flexible learning pathways. Especially in the Philippines, we're very partial to formal education. Like if our, our family member, a sibling or a child does not go to college or does not finish college, we feel let down, right? We feel it's disappointed because for us, the wide perception is that it's a college degree that gives value to an individual. It's a college degree that defines the competence, the skills, the knowledge that an individual has. But with the Philippine Qualifications Framework, there will be a mechanism, or there will be mechanisms developed to actually recognize other means of acquiring knowledge and skills. Right? Because let's admit it, not everybody is cut out for college, right? But it doesn't mean that those that are not for college or for higher education are not good for anything else. In fact, you will have very famous college dropouts like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Manny Pacquiao, right? That who have made a big, big names for themselves, and nobody can dispute that well, they're people who were at the top of their game, right? In fact, you can say that probably by qualification, by competence alone, Bill Gates can have a degree, a college degree equivalent, or even PhD in, say, human resource development, in innovation, in business management, because that's what he's been doing. So you put that down at an everyday level. You have somebody who's maybe your tita or your cousin or your sister, who's been operating a bake shop for 20 years, been doing their bookkeeping, been managing the store, the bake shop, and it's been thriving. And probably she's earning more than somebody who's had a master degree in the family. So we have to recognize that these are different pathways to getting certain competencies, and recognizing those and certifying those at some point will be easier because of the PQF Act. It also paves the way for the recognition of learning and experience outside of the formal education system, which is similar to this. Like for instance, you have that you've learned the skills and the knowledge through practical experience. You're an entrepreneur, for instance, or even a farmer. A farmer who probably has had just, especially the older ones, 6 years of schooling, so mga hanggang grade 6 lang siya, you cannot say that they're not competent in anything, right? Because definitely they would know something about pest control, right? About crop management, about harvesting, and if they're the good ones, they will also have some knowledge of marketing. So those are those are things that will give value to people, not necessarily by way of education. Other examples would be like arts and crafts workers. For instance, the magbuborda ng Lumban and Taal. Some of them might not have education or might not have college degree, but no one else, right? Nobody else has the skill, in fact, the knowledge or the experience of pagbuburda, right? And these are traditional skills, that traditional crafts that we'll have to protect, right? So if you do not, unless we value those skills, we actually do not encourage people going into those crafts. And then also, the PQF establishes or will establish a qualifications registry. So, you for a specific industry, for instance, in pagbuburda, we can say that yung pagbuburda will have a qualification equivalent to a certain level, or it can have different levels. Like if you're just doing this, like just the border, it's level 1 or 2, but if it's more complicated, it can be level 3 or 4 and even higher. And you can have, and you can put that in a registry, and people can enlist themselves, right? Can register that, okay, I'm a certified, well, what first is, that's a qualifications that's put in the register, but also at some point there will be a registry of people qualified to do that, right? An example, it's not here yet, an example is a registry of ASEAN engineers. Right? This is as a result of the mutual recognition arrangement in ASEAN for engineering profession. So and some of the first ASEAN engineers are si Secretary De La Peña of the OSP. So sabi niya, he's a registered ASEAN engineer. So when the Philippines, when the registry was inaugurated, the different countries, member countries brought their engineers to be who qualified, right? Who met the qualification and who met the certification, etc. To sign the register. So it's like enrolling in the bar, right? Or enrolling if you get your license, you sign the register, right? So it's something like that. And then finally, the PQF is a platform for government, industry, and education sector coordination. We highlight this because the Working Group on Education for Economic Development is really pushing for this. We believe that not only in the PQF, but in many education and innovation policy, it cannot be just the government. It is very important that you have industry and the broad education and research community there. By education, we mean not just DepEd, EdShed, and TESDA, but the actual schools, the education community, the research laboratories, because these are the actual things, right? The practical things for which policies are developed. You know, if it's just government, yeah, probably because they think of the national welfare, they can come up with good policy. But you know, the better policies can be crafted if they coordinate with industry and the broader education sector. Okay. The working group also made recommendations to the PQF IRR, which I just summarized it here into four. The first is enhancing the relevance of the PQF to local and regional needs. Right. Usually, when we have frameworks or mandates at the national level, it 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 stays there, or the cascading to the regional and local levels will be very slow. We recommended that in the IRR that everything that's discussed at the national level will have to be cascaded and will have to have regional or local expression. For instance, we can define for qualifications nationally, but how does that translate to regional realities? You will have a region that are 90% agricultural, predominantly agricultural. So it's very important that their qualifications will have to reflect what's already there. You cannot you cannot insist that these are the qualifications that are important without recognizing qualifications that might already be there. Also, the identification of priority sectors and how to do that. Right? There are different recommendations. Why is this relevant? This is relevant because once the qualifications and the descriptors and the levels are defined, those are general, right? But you will have to tailor fit those. You will have to contextualize those to specific industry. For instance, what does a level 1 qualification mean for, say, the nursing profession, or for the IT/BPO, right? For the semiconductors industry, for finance, right? For dentistry, for engineers, so you'll have to do that because it will be a general, but once you go to industry specific, it has to be translated. For instance, for engineering, maybe that's you go to the technician, technologists, engineers, right? So those are different levels. So that the qualifications will be different because the description of the skills and knowledge and the application will be different. So if you want a technician, and this is for the human resource practitioner, if it's a technician you want, is it, if the job requires a technician, do you actually need to hire a full-fledged licensed engineer, right? If the skills actually just ask for a technician. For instance, also, if you want a laboratory assistant, do you need to really hire a microbiologist, a licensed microbiologist or a licensed chemist? If it's just a laboratory assistant, somebody who will clean the plates, retrieve the reagents, learn certain things that the more senior ones generate. So these are things that will have to be broken down by sector. Third is on the identification and selection of the economic and industry sector representative, right? And because they will sit in the council, but there are also working groups that will be created. So we're saying that they should be in the working groups as well. And we have recommended procedures or guidelines for their selection and nomination. And we would like to encourage PMAP to get involved here. I think because you're a national organization, you should be interested in getting one of those slots, right? I mean, of course, there will be other groups who will be interested here, but it's not a permanent seat, right? It's for 2 to 3 years, 2 years. So it will, after 2 years, it will be changed. I think, well, there's a possibility of uh, one renewal, one extension, but after that, it will have to change so that other industry members can have a chance. And then finally, the government, the GIE sector coordination. Here we propose the creation of a working group inside the PQF for this. It's not mentioned in the law itself because the law uh, mentioned working groups for very technical things. But there are two working groups that are being proposed that are not there: the GIE coordination working group and the working group on lifelong learning. So what does PQF mean for human resource development? So this is my last 3 slides. One is it will facilitate mobility of workers, students, and services because now we will see them as embodying competencies rather than the degrees. Right? It's much more difficult for people if they're being judged by the degree that they hold or the degrees that they don't hold than for the actual things that they can do. So it's a very democratizing reform. Second, it addresses the mismatch between the educational qualification and industry needs, right? Because now curricular development training programs can be designed according to the competencies that industries need. So it's not just what do the industries need? We say we need engineers. So, but what types of engineers? What specific skills? What specific competencies do you actually need? So that you don't just graduate engineers and then say, oh, but your engineers can't do the things I want. So it's very important for industry to be involved in this so that that mismatch can be addressed. Right? It also increases the pool of competent human resources across the value chain. Right? Now you see that okay. In fact, we have so much more technicians uh, than we believe we had before. Because before even for technicians, we're already asking for licensed engineer, when in fact probably an engineering student who finish second year college can already do that, or there might be a tech book course to do that, or there might be somebody who maybe is just a high school graduate or an undergraduate, even in high school, but has worked in the field for so long, and they can be certified to be holding such competencies. And finally, it will recognize lifelong learning. And this is not just for those with no degree or low degree, or just from experience. It's also for people who might want to change careers midway, right? And also for people who want to enrich themselves beyond the degree that they hold. Like, you can be a doctor, but suddenly you decided, I want to be a pastry chef. Why not, right? I want to be a horticulturist, and I want to do other things, right? I want to be an engineer. Like, so that these are things that there are qualifications that you already have that can add towards you going earning other types of competence. Now, this is very important. There are different ways by which industry can engage the PQF process. One is, of course, by demystifying the diploma, demystifying the degree by hiring based on competency, right? And this is both an appeal and an encouragement to PMAP members that uh, um, to really hire based on competence. One of our colleagues earlier was just mentioning that one embassy publicized for a vacancy, and there's no mention of any degree at all. What they mentioned are the specific competencies, the specific skills, and experience that are needed for the job. Second is to engage the different departments. So this is 2 and 3, both TESDA, CHED, and also, well, TESDA, CHED, and DepEd, and even PRC in the different processes that they're doing. TESDA for enhancing their Tibet program, and for also uh, for the development of the training, regulation, and skills. Right, industry is really needed here because nobody can say that, like, for somebody to be competent in something, uh, it's enough to just say these are what's needed. If you need industry practitioners, you need industry who are actually using these skills and competence to be able to say that these are the competencies and skills that you need for this. Engage CHED and DepEd because there will be specifications and competency curricular adjustment that they will be doing um, that should be adapted to industry orientation or to industry need. And finally, in quality assuring education and training providers of industry-oriented programs, right? Because there will be schools, there will be training units offering offering programs for certain skills and competencies. But again, quality assurance is important, so industry should be very keen on the process of how the different regulatory bodies quality assure these different offerings, so that you can be sure that when a student or a worker finishes those programs, they indeed will have those competencies. And then this is the last slide. The PQF now basically would focus on what's already there, right? And make it known to everybody that we have that. I think there are so many programs in terms of equivalence and equivalencies and accreditation, credit transfer that many people still don't know about, right? For instance, it's even if you've not set foot in college, if you can show uh, by way of a portfolio and other things that you actually have this experience and you can pass certain qualification requirements, uh, you can earn an equivalence for degrees, right? It depends on what the degrees require, because some degrees might require a thesis, so it's possible you will not take courses anymore, but you might be required to do a thesis, right? But that's in recognition of the skills and knowledge somebody already has. So, but the future potential would be having industry-specific qualifications, right? Also, industry being accredited as certification units, right? You do train your workers. You have OJT, right? You have internship, and maybe in the future there might be apprenticeship, right? Um, um, Businesses should be able to certify that after having been under your OJT program in your company, then they're already skilled at these certain things, right? So it's possible, right? But those are the things that will have to be discussed in the PQF NCC. And also certification of competencies acquired outside of formal education and training systems. So that's related to industry accredited as certification units, but it's also related to the previous slide where we have equivalence and all of those things. So yeah, basically that's it. Those are very basic. There are a lot more to explore, but I hope this would do as an introductory, an introduction to the PQF.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Joy, for that wonderful discussion on the PQF. So if you have any questions for Ms. Joy regarding the PQF, you can kindly indicate them on the box in the GoToWebinar app. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to tell us. So siguro to get the ball rolling, we have a question on how can I, as an HR manager, tell if the qualification I'm looking for in an applicant is aligned with the PQF?
Yeah, okay. Well, first you have to define what qualifications you need. Like for instance, um, a bookkeeper, right? You're asking for a bookkeeper. So you'll have to list down what should the bookkeeper should be able to do. If there are programs, for instance, computer programs or bookkeeping programs that you want them to be versed at, then you will have to indicate that so that it's training for both HR managers and job applicants to really focus on the competence rather than uh, accounting graduate, right? So they will also list somewhere there that they know ebooks, what other programs, and then they've had experience in bookkeeping in certain industries. So it's very important to break down what you need, not just the degree, because sometimes even an applicant with a degree or even higher degrees might not exhibit the competence that you look for, right? So you be very. It's also your responsibility to break down like the competence so that applicants will also be trained, right, to showcase their competence rather than I graduated from this top tier school.
I like how the PQF is actually opening up yung mga qualifications outside of yung usual qualifications that we look for. Like, usually kasi you see in yung mga job descriptions, yung mga graduate of this course,
Yes.
has this license from the PRC. So it actually opens it up to more kinds of avenues to show that they have the qualifications to do a job. So are there any resource materials that HR managers can check if they want to be more aligned to grow with the PQF?
Okay. There is a website, pqf.gov.ph. Is that we'll have to check the exact URL. But there is, yeah, pqf.gov.ph. Right? You can also visit the websites of TESDA, DepEd, and CHED, but you'll have to be a little patient to and dig up where the PQF materials there are. But since the PQF NCC is still being reconstituted because of the law, there will be a little movement, like who will be managing the website, who will be doing communications work. But definitely there are already materials there. In fact, there's a lot. There's quite a lot there.
Okay, we have another question. Will the PQF have any implication on the existing expanded tertiary education equivalency and accreditation program?
I think if there's going to be implication at all, it will be positive, right? Because the FEF has been there for a while, but there's not a lot of takers, right? Because one, they uh, it's not probably not being communicated enough, and again, it's also a cultural thing, right? Having equivalency is not equivalent to going to college, right? So because it's that cultural thing, but if it can be explained that in fact, your experience is equivalent to going to college or maybe even more, then the implication is that there will be more takers, more people can be certified or given equivalencies, and more people will be more conscious about what they actually know and be assertive and be proud that they know about this. We have Ched has been saying that they have very good konti lang, but they have some surprising experiences, like even accountancy, right? They get because they passed the exam, and these are people who've not gone to college but have been practicing bookkeeping and accounting for their own businesses, and probably who are self-learners, self-starters. So they don't need to go to college because they can go to the EPIAP, right? Of course, this is not to discourage people who are inclined towards college education from proceeding, but this is to recognize competencies and skills that are already there, right?
Oh, wow, we're getting more questions. Another question is, since the PQF is a law,
Uh-huh.
technically, is it required for companies to follow the framework?
Okay. It's not that it's required. So there are no penal provisions, right? So if you don't hire by competency, hindi naman kayo mapapine. Except that, of course, there's a moral suasion, kumbaga, or even an official suasion in the mandate for the PQF for companies to start rethinking how you hire, right? Hire by competency, and also for companies to help government develop those qualifications, because it's also for your own good. So it's not a requirement in the sense that, like a tax law, that you will have to pay this tax. This one is, it's a system, it's a framework that's being developed to help companies, in fact, do their thing better, do their business better.
Okay, this one's more of a situational question. So I am an undergrad, but I have advanced skills in reporting tasks. I have learned those in over a decade of BPO experience. Does this also cover applying to big companies like San Miguel and the like if the skills that you acquired came from a BPO?
Okay, these are prospective things, right? But what we're saying here in the future potential is it's possible, right? Remember that we said that we have skills, we have qualifications. There are different levels, and those levels will have to have descriptors in terms of the knowledge, skills, and values, application, as well as degrees of independence. And I said those will be very broad, and you will have to fit that, like really contextualize that to industry. Yung pag-contextualize to industry, that those will have to be done. And my guess is, and don't be surprised, because some companies are in fact hiring based on those skills, right? If you have 20 years of experience from BPO, you probably have experienced this, right? BPOs would prefer applicants that have had previous BPO experience than those without, except that, like for the longest time, especially when they started, they needed more workers than there are applicants. So they would accept everybody and then just train or retrain them, right? But definitely the skills will not go to waste. And even if your skill is gained from a BPO setting, it's possible to for another company or a company outside of the BPO industry to hire you if they're conscious about hiring based on competence.
All right. For our next question, siguro this is an HR manager who's trying to explain why they might have to change some of their ways they're going to measure competency.
Mhm.
So, how could we explain the PQF in layman's terms?
Okay, it's we're also still trying to. It's also a challenge for us. I think the the main thing now is you don't have to explain the entire PQF. You just have to break it down to different components. For instance, hiring, recognizing competence. Right? Why do you need to recognize competence? Because competence is what you look for when you're hiring. Competence is what you want to develop when you're applying for a job or when you're training or you're educating yourself. So that when you do competence based analysis or hiring or application or learning, then you know that even when enrolling, you will look for what's the offering, right? In the of course, um, it's still important to look if the school is respected, but you know there are emerging education or training units that in fact are emerging because they're known for the skills that they impart. So, how to explain that in layman's terms? Let's say that you know we're fixing our qualification system so that we recognize competency based on what the people based on competency or what they can do rather than just based on what diploma or degree they um, they got. But please, we're asking you if help us also how to do this, like how to laymanize the PQF.
Alright. Looks like someone was very interested in the talk and would like to go back to it after this webinar. So, Miss Joy, will you be providing us a copy of your slides?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, we can share with those who participated in the session a copy of the slides and the presentation that was shown. And a recording actually of this session will actually be available soon on PMAP's YouTube channel. So you can search PMAP 1956. I think that is our username in YouTube. So yun. I think that's all the time we have for questions at this moment. Before we end, we'd like to invite you to our upcoming PMAP events. So we have our 641st PMAP General Membership Meeting next Wednesday, November 28th at the Sofitel Philippine Plaza, Manila. So we will find out during this general membership meeting who will win the 8th Makatao Awards for Media Excellence. And if you are a regular rep or an alternative rep of PMAP, exercise your right to vote during the election for our 2019 Board of Officers and Trustees. So we also have an upcoming webinar this coming December 7 from 3 to 4 p.m. on the topic competency-based HR systems. So this will be with the subject matter expert, Mr. Angelito Lupena. This this upcoming webinar is actually a tie-up to the Civil Service Commission. So we hope that you'll be able to join us during that webinar. And once again, we thank Ms. Joy for being with us this afternoon to discuss the Philippine Qualifications Framework. And we hope that you'll be able to apply it in your respective organizations, especially when it comes to hiring for competency rather than just referring to the typical qualifications like college degree, license, and PRC, mga ganon. So this has been Isa Neri, part of the PINA professional staff, and we thank you once again for joining us this